Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. On a remote cliffside, a father and son built their dream cabin by hand. But when a powerful HOA tries to steal their land with forged maps and legal warfare, a quiet home becomes the front line of a high-stakes battle for truth, legacy, and the right to exist. The last bolt went in with a dull metallic click, and Elijah looked up at me like we had just wired together an entire city instead of a weather-beaten solar inverter on a strip of lonely coastline. His hands were smudged with dust and salt, his hair blown sideways by the ocean wind, and the grin on his face was the same one he used to make when he was 8 and figured out how to start a campfire on his own. 5 years of weekends, holidays, and skipped vacations had led to this moment. Every board sanded by hand, every beam bolted down by the two of us, every stubborn mistake solved with coffee, diagrams, and more swearing than I like to admit. I stepped back, watched the indicator light blink alive, and for the first time in months, I didn't think about load calculations or waterproof seals. I just listened to the waves hammer the rocks below our little cliff like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm again. We hung the sign that afternoon, carved from driftwood a neighbor fisherman had hauled up one winter morning. Elijah had burned the letters himself with a soldering pen he borrowed from my lab at the university. Crabstone Haven, the year underneath it. I had argued over the year. He insisted it had to mark the end, not the beginning. I let him win. I usually do. We mounted it on 2 iron hooks beside the entrance, just above the stone steps we had laid together in our 3rd year, when his legs were still short and the bags of cement were still too heavy for him. He stood there staring at it, not saying anything, and I realized he wasn't looking at the wood. He was looking at the 5 versions of himself that had grown up while we built this place. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar, salt, and the faint hint of smoke from the first fire we'd lit in the stone hearth 3 weeks earlier. The maps on the wall were originals from my grandfather's time at sea, the paper soft and yellowed, lines fading but still steady. The rainwater system ticked quietly above the ceiling beams. The backup battery hummed under the workbench. It wasn't luxury, not even close, but it was ours from foundation to roof ridge, from the first shovel of dirt to the final coat of sealant. A stubborn tide-carved piece of family history reclaimed from silence. 3 days later, the silence broke. I heard the engine before I saw the vehicle, tires crunching over gravel that wasn't theirs to crunch on. A black sport utility vehicle rolled down the narrow access road that technically didn't belong to anyone but had always ended here, because my grandfather had built it with his own hands when there was nothing but rock and gulls around. It stopped a little too close to the gate. 2 men got out first, both wearing matching navy jackets with the gold lettering of an association I had seen once or twice on highway billboards. Ocean's Crest Homeowners Association. They had clipboards, tablets, the whole suburban cavalry. Then she stepped out. Karen Braithwaite. You could tell she used to sell houses by the way she stood. Like a property showing never really ends, and every conversation is a listing waiting to be signed. Sunglasses, pearl earrings, impractical beige heels sinking slightly into the dirt. She didn't say hello. She didn't introduce herself. She scanned the surroundings like a bored customs officer looking for forbidden fruit. You built all this yourself? She asked, like it was a crime and a compliment at the same time. With my son, I answered, stepping between her and the front steps without touching her. And you're trespassing. That made one of her assistants flinch, not her. Her mouth tightened just enough to pretend she was amused. Oh, we're not here as trespassers, she said, pulling a tablet closer. We're here as representatives of an association monitoring coastal development within our environmental observation zone. I actually laughed. Not politely, not socially. A real, honest laugh. You're 2 miles north, I said. Your development ends where the county access fence meets the ridge road. Everything past that is outside your jurisdiction. Her eyes finally locked onto mine. That's not what our updated coastal oversight map says, she replied, tapping her screen. And according to new guidelines, all properties along this stretch of shoreline fall under our environmental responsibility, which includes access coordination. The word access hung longer in the air than it should have. She gestured vaguely toward the beach below. Several of our residents have filed concerns that your fencing limits public shoreline approach. We'd like to conduct a full inspection and coordinate an access solution. Elijah stepped closer to me without realizing he had moved at all. There is no public access through this property, I said calmly. This land has been deeded as private coastal parcel since the 1940s. My grandfather registered it separately from the county residential zones. I have the documents, the federal coastal permit, the topographical surveys. You don't get to coordinate anything unless a judge signs off on it. One of the men took a picture of the house without asking. The shutter sound seemed to echo longer than the waves. Karen smiled. The kind of smile that exists purely to make sure you understand she doesn't care what you just said. We'll be documenting everything, she said. Because if this structure isn't properly registered with the community, it could be considered unauthorized construction within a regulated shoreline corridor. That's a very long way of saying you don't know what you're talking about, I replied. Her smile vanished just for a moment, enough to confirm everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. She slid a thin envelope out of her folder and placed it on the wooden railing beside the front steps, like she was leaving a tip after bad service. Notice of preliminary review, she said. This is just the beginning, Mr. Caldwell. I'd suggest cooperation. It makes things easier on everyone. Then she turned around and walked back to her vehicle, heels digging into the dirt like she was marking her claim with every step. The engine roared, tires spun, and she was gone, leaving dust, silence, and a paper I hadn't asked for fluttering in the ocean wind. Elijah looked up at me. She's not allowed to come back, right? I stared at the envelope, then out at the water, where the sun was burning gold across the waves. She's allowed to try. I said, that's not the same thing as getting away with it. The first thing to go was the power. It happened early, barely 6 in the morning, when I was making coffee on our little propane stove, the only thing in the cabin that still had that unmistakable smell of something designed in the last 20 years. The battery inverter had gone dark sometime overnight. At first, I thought we'd overloaded it. I checked the connections, reset the breakers, tested the panels. Nothing. The diagnostic readout blinked red, then went blank. Elijah stumbled out of bed, yawning and rubbing his eyes. Did we blow it? No, I muttered. We got cut. I tried calling the service rep from Solar Coast, the company that helped us register our off-grid install years ago. After 5 minutes on hold, I finally got someone who explained, in the tone of someone reading from a script, that the system had been temporarily disabled due to a report of unauthorized infrastructure connected to non-compliant shoreline property. I had to ask him to repeat that, twice. The guy sounded embarrassed reading it. Who reported this? I asked. I'm sorry, sir, that information's confidential. I didn't yell, I just hung up. By mid-morning, a White County truck with a faded seal pulled up just outside our gate. I stepped out to meet the man before he could even knock. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and a hard hat that looked like it had never seen a real construction site. Jason Caldwell? He asked, clipboard already in hand. Depends who's asking. Travis Benning, County Code Compliance. I'm here to inspect the premises based on a notification from a local municipal partner. Let me guess, I said. Ocean's Crest HOA. He gave me a look that was somewhere between an apology and a wince. I'm just following up on a report about unpermitted shoreline structures. I didn't say anything. Just turned, walked inside, and came back out with a folder so thick it had its own shadow. I handed it over without ceremony. Coastal Commission Permit. Permit for solar install environmental impact study from 2023, registered title deed from 1947, and 3 separate federal acknowledgments of historical private land status. You can flip through it if you want, but I suggest starting from the back. That's where the signatures are. To his credit, Travis actually read through it. Not all of it. No one reads all of it, but enough to know this was a colossal waste of a Tuesday morning. Okay, he said finally, I'll close the file. This shouldn't have been flagged. No offense, I replied, but I don't think this was flagged. I think it was hunted. He gave me another one of those awkward little nods, then drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and bureaucracy behind him. That night, Elijah and I cooked dinner by lantern light. The power still hadn't come back, and I had no intention of groveling to a utility that shut us down based on some HOA tattletale. The wind was loud that evening, the kind of constant howl that gets in your bones and makes every creak in the beams sound like something creeping just out of sight. After dinner, I went out to double-check the perimeter. That's when I found it. Tucked high up in a eucalyptus tree about 30 feet from our eastern fence line was a small black box about the size of a fist, a surveillance camera professionally mounted, aimed dead on at our property line. It was wired into a weatherproof battery pack. No branding. No identification. Elijah spotted me staring and came up behind me. What is that? I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about HOA volunteers with drone licenses, about Karens who think rules only apply to other people, about how far some people will go to protect an imaginary line on a map. I took pictures, disconnected the camera, bagged it. The next day, our mailbox, one of those rusting steel units at the top of the hill, barely held together by coastal neglect and 100 years of salt, had a new envelope waiting, another notice. This one from the Office of Environmental Infrastructure Assessment, informing me that a community-submitted complaint had flagged my cabin as a potential hazard due to unauthorized bluff modifications and non-standard grading work. The words were longer than the truth behind them, but the message was clear. They were going to bury me in paper before they could bury me in concrete. I made one phone call that afternoon to Clara Mendes. She was a referral from a colleague at the university, a property rights attorney with a background in land use litigation and a reputation for being able to make HOA presidents cry without raising her voice. We met the next morning in the back of a bookstore cafe. I brought the documents. She brought a yellow legal pad and a steel gaze that made me feel like the kid in trouble at school, even though I was the one under siege. "They're testing boundaries," she said after reading for 5 minutes, figuratively and literally, and you're giving them enough surface to scratch. "I haven't broken any laws," I said. "That's not the point," she replied. "They're not trying to prove you're illegal. They're trying to exhaust you. Pressure, paperwork, delays. You'll get tired, make a mistake, lose ground, and then they'll pounce. Standard HOA warfare." She outlined a strategy. Step 1, document everything. Step 2, report the surveillance device to the sheriff. Step 3, submit an affidavit with all permits preemptively to county code compliance. Step 4, file a cease and desist against Ocean's Crest for misrepresenting jurisdiction in public correspondence. As we walked out, she asked me one last question. "You said your land was inherited, that you have proof it predates any HOA formation." I nodded. "My grandfather homesteaded this strip in 1945, registered it separately through a now-defunct coastal jurisdiction. I have the hard copies, originals." She smiled. "Then we have leverage." That night, the wind came in colder. I watched Elijah sleeping in his loft bed, completely unaware that his childhood sanctuary had become a battleground for grown-ups playing cartographer with someone else's dream. And outside, somewhere just past the tree line, another vehicle idled for just a little too long before turning around. It started with an envelope. Again. This one arrived by certified mail, hand-delivered by a courier, with the kind of expression that tells you he's had a long morning of handing people bad news wrapped in legalese. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize, Sanders, Kellerman, and Boyd, but the embossed stamp said everything I needed to know. Ocean's Crest Homeowners Association v. Jason Caldwell, filed in San Diego County Superior Court. The claim: unauthorized construction on municipally controlled coastal zone, obstruction of community access, and breach of regional shoreline ordinances. I read the whole thing standing in the kitchen, barefoot, coffee cooling in my hand. By the time I got to the second page, my jaw was clenched so tight my molars hurt. They had attached a map. Not the map I knew, not the one filed in my grandfather's day, or the ones reaffirmed during our permitting process. No, this one was new. Digitized, color-coded, with boundaries redrawn like someone had run their finger along the shoreline and decided this looks like ours now. Our parcel, my land, was highlighted in light green and labeled as part of an extended HOA environmental oversight buffer. It was total fiction, but it looked official as hell. I called Clara and read the case number over the phone. She didn't swear. Clara doesn't swear, but the pause she took before answering did the job. "They're going for the throat," she said. "This isn't about inspections or permits anymore. They're trying to shift legal ground under your feet." That afternoon, I drove into the city and pulled a copy of the new map from the county records office. It had been entered into the system just 6 weeks prior, quietly replacing the older dataset used by zoning software and regional planners. On the surface, it looked legitimate: clean formatting, county seal, metadata tags. But it didn't reference the historic parcel number for my land. It used a newly assigned ID, which meant someone had redefined the boundary in the back room and hoped no one would notice. I had a pretty good idea who. Clara met me back at the cabin with her assistant and a large format printer in the trunk of her SUV. We laid the maps out on the dining table, my grandfather's original deed sketch, the county maps from the 70s, the federal environmental permit from 3 years ago, and now this. The forgery stood out like a rotten tooth in a smile. "We need a surveyor," she said. "A licensed one, independent." So we called one. Ben Huxley was a lanky guy with a crooked hat and the dry humor of someone who'd spent 20 years dealing with people who think fences are optional. He showed up with a drone, a tripod scanner, and a stack of topo maps so old the corners looked like burnt toast. He spent 2 days mapping every line of the property, from the iron anchor bolts my grandfather had driven into the cliff to the rock piles that marked the original coastal fencing. He even found an old U.S. Navy triangulation marker half buried in saltgrass near the eastern bluff. His conclusion: "Your land's yours, by at least 75 feet. The HOA map is optimistic." That was the nice way of saying bullshit. Clara took his report and bundled it with our documents, then filed a motion to dismiss the HOA's case based on fraudulent jurisdictional claims and cartographic misrepresentation. Then she did something even better. She sent a letter to the district attorney's office requesting an investigation into unauthorized alteration of county geodata for civil gain, because while the map looked like it came from the county, the metadata told a different story. It had been submitted via a private consultant portal run by an outside contractor named Brandon Braithwaite, Karen's son. Same last name, same address, same HOA development. They'd slipped a fake map into the system through a contractor login, hoping no one would trace it. It might have worked, except they didn't count on me being stubborn or Clara being feral. While the legal wheels started turning, the HOA went on the offensive. Their website now featured a banner protecting coastal access for all. They posted blogs about irresponsible construction near fragile bluff lines. One article included a blurred-out photo of our cabin with the caption, "Unauthorized structure." Karen herself did a video interview for a local cable station, standing on the HOA's private trail in full windbreaker mode, talking about a worrying trend of rogue development threatening our community's harmony and safety. Elijah watched the clip. Over my shoulder. "She sounds like she's running for sheriff," he muttered. "She's campaigning for control," I said. "Sheriffs at least have to follow laws." I could feel the war shifting. This wasn't a zoning dispute anymore. This was about ownership, power, and who got to decide what the coastline looked like, and who was allowed to exist on it. That night, I sat at the edge of the bluff, just past the windbreak line, and stared out at the dark water below. It was the same tide my grandfather had watched, the same wind that had cracked the same stones, and now it was me, caught in the middle of some polished suburban turf war because a woman with a title and a clipboard had decided my home didn't match her HOA-approved worldview. I wasn't going anywhere, but neither was she. The morning we went public, the sky was gunmetal gray. Not quite storm weather, but enough to make the sea look angry. Appropriate, I thought. I sat at the old writing desk we'd built into the corner of the cabin, just below a wide bay window, and clicked post on a thread I'd been piecing together for over a week. I didn't do social media much. Never had the patience for performative hashtags or humble-bragging beach photos. But I knew the rules of engagement now. The first to control the narrative wins the public fight, and Ocean's Crest had already painted me as a squatter, a threat, a hazard with a postal code. So I posted the truth. Photos of the construction process, one for every year. Elijah in goggles and gloves, hammering, painting, carrying wood twice his size. The original deed, scanned and annotated, showing the land patent from 1947 with my grandfather's signature still legible in faded blue ink. The Coastal Commission permits, the environmental reports, even a photo of my grandfather standing near the edge of the cliff in the 70s, holding a marine compass like he was measuring the edge of the world. I didn't add music or slogans, just a headline. "My son and I built this home with our bare hands. Now an HOA that doesn't own the land is trying to take it." I expected a few dozen likes, maybe some sympathy. What I got was fire. Within an hour, the post had been shared across local community groups. By midday, I was getting emails from environmentalists, civil liberties watchdogs, and even a few off-grid survivalists who thought I was some kind of martyr for land sovereignty. The comment sections were flooded with people from all over the state, some with horror stories of their own HOAs, others just outraged at the audacity of a neighborhood council trying to annex private coastline. And then came the journalist. Her name was Danielle Tran, a reporter from the San Diego Tribune. She had this direct, unblinking way of talking that made you feel like you were already on record, even if the mic wasn't visible. She showed up with a camera guy and a notebook full of scribbled arrows. We sat on the deck under the overhang, while Elijah fidgeted nearby, trying to look disinterested, but clearly eavesdropping on every word. Danielle asked about the construction, the land, the map fraud. She didn't interrupt much, just let me talk, like she was assembling puzzle pieces in her head. I handed her a printed packet of documents, permits, property history, the full topographical survey from Huxley. She flipped through it quickly, then looked up. Do you have any idea how many cases like this exist in California? I don't care about California, I said. I care about this cliff, this house, and the fact that a group of suburban monarchs think they can redraw maps to suit their beachfront fantasy. Danielle smiled, just barely. 2 days later, her article ran with the headline, Private Land, Public Battle, a Father and Son's Fight Against HOA Overreach. It hit hard. The photos were front and center. Our handmade cabin against the ocean, the carved crabstone haven sign, a shot of Elijah holding a mallet, grinning like we hadn't been stalked and sued by people who think stucco equals sovereignty. The piece went viral, national viral, and then the tide turned. State Senator Mendez, no relation to Clara, believe it or not, posted it on her official feed, commenting on the urgent need to review local HOAs and their encroachment powers. A coastal property rights watchdog picked it up. Hell, even a libertarian podcast did an episode titled The HOA Tried to Take His Ocean. Karen was not pleased. 3 days after the article dropped, she gave her own statement. A local TV interview conducted from the HOA clubhouse patio, staged like a war room disguised as a brunch spot. She called me a non-compliant structure resident and claimed I had denied rightful access to the shoreline, that I had blocked passage to at least 17 Ocean's Crest residents. She even brought visual aids, printed stills from a drone shot, of our fence and some blown-up HOA bylaws on foam board. It was peak Karen, but people weren't buying it. The comments on the video turned against her fast. Someone dug up her old real estate listings where she had bragged about secluded private properties with no oversight. Another user noticed her son's name, Brandon Braithwaite, matched the one on the altered GIS metadata. Conspiracy forums lit up. Then came the best part. A local YouTuber with a decent following dropped a 20-minute breakdown of the situation, complete with sarcastic animations of HOA meetings and a digital recreation of the map fraud timeline. The title, Karen Redraws the Coastline and Gets Smoked. Even Clara laughed at that one. But the real win came in the form of a letter from the state prosecutor's office, an official notice confirming that they were opening a preliminary investigation into alleged tampering with county GIS data and improper jurisdictional claims by private governance entities. In short, the state was now watching. Karen, of course, doubled down. Ocean's Crest put out a press release calling the media sensationalist, accusing me of obstructionist behavior, and announcing the formation of a Shoreline Access Task Force, which, near as I could tell, was just a renamed volunteer harassment squad. Clara wasn't fazed. They're panicking, she said, skimming the release. It's hard to keep control of the story when the truth gets louder. That night, I stood on the deck, watching Elijah skip rocks into the surf below. The air smelled like salt and eucalyptus and faint smoke from our chimney. We'd survived another round. Not one, not yet, but survived. And the world was finally watching. You can always tell when the system decides you're a problem. It's never all at once. It starts with friction, the subtle drag of things that used to move smoothly. Then one day, you wake up and realize the whole machine's turned against you, and every lever you pull spits sparks instead of movement. The first sign came from the university. I got an email from the Faculty Review Board. Subject line, advisory notice, ethics inquiry opened. Somebody had filed a complaint. Anonymously, of course, alleging that I was utilizing university resources for private construction, misrepresenting institutional affiliation in public disputes, and engaging in activities that may reflect negatively on the university's professional reputation. The wording was precise, lawyer written, cold as polished steel. I sat in the faculty lounge reading it over lukewarm coffee while 3 adjuncts next to me debated who stole their parking spots. I didn't even get angry, just tired. I forwarded the email to Clara. Her reply came back in less than 5 minutes. Don't engage. Let me draft a response. This is pressure, not policy. 2 days later, someone spray painted the side of our mailbox with the words "Private Thief" in dripping red. Elijah found it on his way back from school and stared at it for a long minute before walking in. He didn't say anything, just handed me the mail. A thin stack of envelopes, including a warning from the county fire authority about unsecured flammable materials near a residential zone. We cook with propane, 1 tank, fully enclosed, regulated, labeled, safe. I knew the game now. They were turning every agency they could find into a pressure valve. Later that week, a city sanitation truck rolled up at 8 in the morning. No appointment, no notice. The guy knocked on the door with a clipboard and a flashlight. "Sewer compliance inspection," he said, trying not to look sheepish. "We're not on city sewer," I said. "We're on gray water and certified composting. Approved 3 years ago." He scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, I know. Just had to check." "You get a call from the HOA?" He didn't answer, just backed up toward his truck like I might bite. It wasn't just them. Elijah started getting stared at in school. Snide comments. One kid asked if he lived in a shack built on stolen land. Another asked if we were getting kicked out. He didn't tell me about it right away. I heard from a teacher, Ms. Daniels, who called after class. He's quiet, withdrawn, not like before. "I just thought you should know." I sat him down that night, asked gently, careful not to push. He shrugged, then said, "They think we're squatters." I didn't have a clean answer for that. I didn't want to lie. Instead, I showed him the deed again. The survey. The pictures of him at 8, hammering boards with more enthusiasm than aim. I told him this house was built with bare hands, hard truth, and more permits than some cities require for a swimming pool, and no one was taking that away. That night, I set up the new cameras, 4 of them mounted discreetly along the tree line and entrance road, thermal, wide angle, cloud uploaded. We weren't just building anymore, we were defending. Good thing, too, because 2 nights later, someone tried to break in. It was just after midnight. I heard the faint crunch of gravel, not from the front road, but from the slope behind the cabin, the one we never use because of erosion. I killed the lantern, motioned to Elijah to stay low, and checked the monitor. One figure, hooded, moving slowly. A second figure just out of frame. Then a metal click, someone trying the latch on the back storage shed. I flicked the outside lights. They scattered fast. No faces, just shadows and boots crunching through the brush. But they left behind a crowbar and a trail of footprints that led straight to the HOA trailhead 2 ridges north. Clara filed for an injunction the next day, citing stalking, harassment, and attempted trespass by known members of Ocean's Crest. The judge signed a temporary restraining order that same afternoon. Didn't stop the pressure, though. 2 code enforcement notices, 1 letter from the State Board of Equalization requesting a property tax reassessment, and a call from the Department of Water Resources asking if I was aware of recent concerns about unauthorized shoreline alterations. The irony was nuclear. They were trying to drown me in paper while accusing me of reshaping the coast. Clara was furious. "This is the administrative version of a mob hit," she said. "Not illegal, just relentless." And still, in the middle of all of this, Elijah asked me if we could finish the porch swing. So we did. We built it that Sunday afternoon while a drone hovered a little too long overhead and the wind snapped off the water like a whip. He drilled. I braced. We didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Every screw, every knot, every inch of tension in that chain was one more way of telling them, we're still here. That night, I sat outside with a mug of coffee and a length of legal correspondence thick enough to choke a horse. The sky was clear, cold, and full of stars. Somewhere out there, a Karen was plotting her next move, but we weren't backing down. Not now. Not ever. You can build all the fences in the world, but the people who don't believe in boundaries won't stop at them. It was just past 2 in the morning when I woke up to the sound of metal tearing. Not the subtle squeak of a gate, not the soft crunch of someone sneaking. Metal being ripped from wood, like a crowbar being dragged through stubborn hinges. Elijah was still asleep in the loft, breathing slow. I didn't call his name. Just grabbed the flashlight, the phone, and the bat I kept tucked behind the door ever since the shed incident. The cameras were already pinging. 4 alerts. Motion. Front gate. East fence. Perimeter breach. I looked at the screen and froze. They were back. Not 1 or 2 this time. At least 6 people. 4 men in dark hoodies. One of them carried bolt cutters. One wore a reflective vest. And in the middle of them stood Karen. Her beige windbreaker glowed like a damn lighthouse in the infrared feed. She stood behind the others, gesturing, not shouting, not charging. Calm. Focused. Like she was orchestrating a rescue operation for something that didn't need rescuing. I switched to the wide-angle camera. That's when I saw it. They'd brought a rental trailer and parked it just outside the fence line. No plates, no logos. They weren't just planning to make a point. They were planning to take something. Or someone. I dialed the sheriff's office and hit speaker. My voice was calm, too calm. Multiple trespassers, private property, suspected forced entry, one known identity. Karen Braithwaite, president of Ocean's Crest HOA. I have footage. They are armed with tools. The dispatcher was already logging it. Officers were en route. I went to Elijah and shook his shoulder. Wake up. Don't panic. We're going into the bathroom and we're locking the door. His eyes opened, confused. What's happening? Karen's back, with friends. His face changed fast. Sleep to steal in 2 seconds. He didn't argue, just grabbed his hoodie and followed me. We locked ourselves in the windowless bathroom, reinforced during our build for hurricane safety. I kept the live feed open, heart pounding in my throat. They'd ripped the gate clean off, walked in like they owned the place. Karen led them right up to the deck. She held a clipboard, still with the clipboard, and said something I couldn't hear on camera. Then, to my disbelief, she pointed at the house and said clearly, "It's unoccupied. Proceed." They started moving toward the door, and that's when the floodlights kicked in. Automatic, brutal, blinding. The motion sensors we installed last year when coyotes had been sniffing around the compost bins. They scattered for a moment, but Karen held her ground, turning toward the cameras and waving like she was on parade. Then she said it. I'll never forget it. Right into the night air, full of confidence, full of contempt. If they're inside, let them think it's a reclamation. Nobody lives here legally anyway. She didn't see the sheriff's cruiser lights cresting the ridge behind her. Didn't hear the gravel flying under tires as 2 patrol units rolled in hot, sirens dead silent, but lights flashing like judgment. The moment was biblical. Karen turned just as the first officer stepped out, weapon holstered but hand resting on it. He didn't need to shout. Hands where I can see them. Step away from the structure, now. One of the men bolted. Bad move. He didn't get far before being tackled into the dirt. Another tried to explain something about community enforcement rights and coastal stewardship authority. The deputy just stared at him like he was high. They zip-tied all 4 men, including the one in the vest. Karen, she tried diplomacy. I'm the president of Ocean's Crest. This structure is an illegal installation on community adjacent. You are on private land. The officer cut her off. With forced entry tools. At night. With recorded audio of you directing the breach. You're under arrest. The look on her face wasn't fear, it was disbelief, as if the idea of being held accountable was some kind of personal insult. She went into the cruiser still talking about legal immunity, about oversight zones, about emergency access protocols. None of it mattered. Not that night. I stepped out once they were gone. The gate was mangled. One of the porch railings cracked, but the house stood. Elijah stood beside me, staring into the dark. He didn't speak until we sat on the swing we'd just finished building. Do you think it's over now? I looked at the ruined gate, the tire tracks, the spot where Karen had stood like a general in a battle that never belonged to her. No, I said. But the war just turned. Courtrooms have a smell to them. Old carpet, cheap coffee, and the stress of people trying to pretend they aren't sweating through their shirts. Ours was no different. San Diego County Courthouse, Department 36. Monday morning, overcast. Karen showed up in a navy pantsuit that probably cost more than our solar array. She looked tired, but still smug. The kind of smug you only see on people who genuinely think the system was built for them, and them alone. It wasn't just a trespass case anymore. After the break-in, the sheriff's department found enough evidence to recommend felony charges. Criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit property invasion, falsification of public records, and collusion with a government official. And the kicker? The DA agreed. Karen and 3 of her task force were arraigned within 72 hours of the incident. Her son Brandon was also named, not for the break-in, but for the GIS data tampering, which, as it turns out, is a serious federal offense when it involves property boundary manipulation tied to regulatory zoning. Clara stood beside me in the courtroom like a legal warhammer dressed in linen, calm, quiet, unshakable. She'd spent the last 2 weeks assembling a case so airtight it could have survived a hurricane. Exhibit binders thicker than bricks. A separate USB drive for every fraudulent map, every conflicting email, every HOA newsletter that casually mentioned pending shoreline authority, like they were annexing Crimea. The judge, a woman named McNeil with eyes like radar, opened with a tone that said she had no patience for theatrics. Karen's attorney tried to argue jurisdiction, then intent, then community safety. Each point fell apart like wet drywall. And then came the bombshell. Clara introduced our independent surveyor, Ben Huxley, who walked the jury through the original property lines, the grandfather deed, and the high-resolution scans of the forged HOA map. He held up both maps side by side and said, "Deadpan, one of these was filed in 1947. The other was photoshopped last December by a guy whose LinkedIn says he's a community engagement strategist." Laughter in a courtroom isn't common. That one earned a full 10 seconds. But it got worse. For them. The county's own records administrator, subpoenaed and nervous, testified that the altered map had been uploaded from a private contractor's login, not through standard municipal protocols. When asked who had authorized the override, he hesitated. Clara handed him a printed email. It was from Karen, addressed to Brandon with the subject line, "Map submission, let's get this done before the new review period. Signed, time-stamped, game over." At that point, the judge called a recess. Karen's lawyer tried to cut a deal before the court resumed. The DA wasn't interested. They wanted a precedent. When we returned, Clara stood and presented a final request. A permanent protective injunction against Ocean's Crest HOA entering or making claims against Crabstone Haven or any adjacent non-member property within a 500-foot buffer. It was granted. In full, the judge ruled that the land was historically private, with all federal and county documentation intact, that the HOA's claims constituted malicious harassment and willful misrepresentation, that the GIS data tampering was a calculated attempt to fabricate jurisdiction. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts, Brandon as well. 2 of the volunteers took plea deals. The third, the guy in the safety vest, cried on the stand and asked the court for leniency. He got probation and community service. Karen, 7 years. No parole for 3. Brandon got 3 years in federal custody with a 2-year tech restriction. The court described him as a threat to public trust infrastructure. And then came the ruling against the HOA itself. Judge McNeil ordered a full public apology to be issued within 30 days, a $400,000 compensation to me and Elijah for damages, legal costs, and emotional distress, a mandated reorganization of the HOA board, supervised by the County Oversight Committee. They had to hold new elections, and Karen's name was barred from the ballot for life. The courtroom emptied slowly after the verdict. Reporters gathered outside. Danielle Tran was there, camera already rolling. I gave her a nod, but I didn't speak. Let the paperwork speak for itself. Back at the cabin, Elijah and I opened the windows for the first time in weeks. The ocean smelled cleaner, or maybe it just smelled like freedom. We put the gate back up that weekend. Reinforced hinges, extra bolts. On the front, we nailed up a new sign. Private property, legally proven. Do not test us. Elijah said we should add emojis. I almost agreed. It took a while for the quiet to feel real again. After months of letters, cameras, hearings, and late-night whispers through plywood walls, silence didn't come back like an old friend. It crept in slowly, uncertainly, like it was checking if we'd chase it off too. But it stayed. Elijah and I spent that first week doing absolutely nothing useful. No repairs, no legal calls, no reading court transcripts or annotating property maps. We just existed, slept late, ate eggs and toast, skipped school, skipped everything. I think he watched the same surfing documentary 3 times in a row just because he could. I didn't stop him. Crabstone Haven finally felt like home again. Not a battleground, not a line in the sand. A home. Then one morning, about 3 weeks after the final ruling, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note, barely 2 lines. I was wrong. I didn't know the full story. I'm sorry we made it worse. No name. But I recognized the handwriting. It was from the volunteer, the one in the safety vest who cried in court, the guy who thought he was doing the right thing. For a second, I just stared at the paper. Then I folded it neatly and tucked it inside the old blueprint folder with all the permits and legal decisions. I wasn't angry, not anymore. People do stupid things when they think they're protecting something, even if that something is just a made-up map and a line of hedges. Elijah started inviting friends over again. Not many, just a few close ones. They helped him install a proper flagpole near the deck, not for a country or even for a cause, just a simple wooden mast where he hung a tattered canvas flag we'd painted together years ago, back when the cabin was still only half a dream. It read, Crabstone Haven, 2025. One evening, I got an email from the State Bar's Coastal Rights Committee asking if I'd consider speaking at an upcoming symposium about land use abuse and HOA overreach. I laughed. Then I forwarded it to Clara. She accepted on my behalf without even asking, said it was time I stopped pretending I wasn't a symbol now. Danielle Tran wrote a follow-up piece titled, From Underdog to Icon, the Man Who Fought the HOA and Won. It made the front page. I still get mail. Not threats anymore. Questions mostly. People from across the country asking what they can do about their own HOA nightmares. Some just want advice. Some want validation. Some just want to know they're not crazy for feeling boxed in by rules they never voted for. I answer when I can. I tell them to document everything, know their deeds, know their neighbors, fight clean, but fight hard, and to never ever underestimate the power of a clipboard in the wrong hands. Elijah told me last week he wants to study architecture, says he wants to design homes that don't look like prison boxes with Wi-Fi. I asked him what inspired him. He shrugged and said, I built something with you that mattered. That felt like ours. I didn't cry, but I did replace the porch swing chain with marine-grade stainless steel, just in case. The new HOA board, yes, they actually reformed, sent me a formal invitation to attend a community reconciliation meeting. I declined politely. Sent back a printed copy of the ruling with a sticky note that read, This is the only reconciliation that matters. The gate is still locked, but it doesn't feel defensive anymore. It just feels finished. We added a new plaque under the flag this month. It reads, Caldwell Family Property. Not a zone, not a buffer, not for sale. Some surfers pass by on the beach below sometimes and wave. Some know the story. Most don't. That's fine. This land knows. And that's enough.